Good evening, my name is James Dagg and this is a special report. May 28th may seem like just another day. You might have a final, or perhaps you have a video project due. However, for the people of Southgate, Kentucky, that date has a much more tragic significance. The Beverly Hills Supper Club fire of Southgate, Kentucky is the third deadliest nightclub fire in U.S. history. It occurred on the night of Saturday, May 28, 1977, during the Memorial Day weekend. 165 people died and 200 were injured as a result of the blaze. Beverly Hills was a major attraction just 6 miles outside of Cincinnati, Ohio, and drew its talent from Las Vegas, Nashville, Hollywood, and New York, among other places. It had opened under the then-current management in 1971. But as early as 1937, the site had been a popular night spot and a legal gambling house. Several additions were completed by 1976, creating a sprawling complex of function rooms and service areas connected by narrow hallways. It is believed as many as 3,000 patrons and 182 employees were inside the club at 9 p.m. on the evening of the fire, just as the early show was beginning in the cabaret room. The headliner for the show, popular Hollywood singer and actor John Davidson, was in his dressing room. Comedians Jim Tedder and Jim McDonald were performing the warm-up act. The cabaret room was the larger of two showrooms with a stage, and it was estimated that over 1,300 patrons had been squeezed into the room. Because of the overcrowding, additional guests had been seated on ramps leading to the stage. Elsewhere in the club, patrons were enjoying their meals and drinks in several restaurants, bars, private party rooms, and the Empire Room, the other performance room. A wedding reception in the Zebra Room had ended at 8:30 p.m. Some guests complained that the room was becoming overheated, though no smoke was in evidence yet. The doors of the Zebra Room were closed after the reception ended, and the fire continued to smolder undetected for another 25 minutes. Two waitresses looking for tray jacks entered the Zebra Room at about 8:56 p.m. They saw dense smoke hanging near the ceiling and notified management immediately. A phone call was placed to the fire department at 9:01 p.m., and the first fire engine arrived in only 3 minutes, as it happened to be in the area of the club at the time of the call. Outside, emergency crews from throughout the region were responding to the scene. In all, 33 fire departments comprising 522 firefighters rushed to the burning nightclub. Meanwhile, the management used 2 fire extinguishers inside the room, but to little effect. The fire had taken hold and could no longer be contained inside the room. At 9:08 p.m., busboy Walter Bailey interrupted the show in the cabaret room, taking the stage to ask patrons to leave and pointing out the exits to the left and right of the stage. Some of the spectators obeyed and began to leave the cabaret room through the exits. Bailey was hailed as one of the heroes of the night, receiving official recognition and a letter from then U.S. President Jimmy Carter. Bailey said later that for years he rejected the title of hero and wondered if he'd had done enough. The fire burst into the cabaret room at 9:10 p.m., preceded by thick smoke, and spread all over the room, quickly engulfing it. Those who had not evacuated quickly panicked. Many of them would be found dead piled up near the main entrance. The flames spread so rapidly that a full evacuation of the sprawling, crowded building was not possible. Firefighters carry out bodies as the death toll surpasses 100. After roughly another hour, firefighters are evacuated for fear the roof would collapse. The fire continues to consume the building. Dazed survivors in evening wear stumble down the hill. At midnight, the roof of the cabaret room collapses, and around 2 a.m., the fire is declared under control, but the search for victims continues. Ultimately, 160 people die in the fire and 3 die later in the hospital. A temporary morgue is set up at the Fort Thomas Armory. The investigation into the fire found the following deficiencies as enumerated by the Cincinnati Enquirer. The first factor was overcrowding. Although seating charts recovered from the club after the fire showed that the cabaret room normally held between 614 and 756 people, a hostess who had worked at the club for several years estimated occupancy on the date in question to be well over 1,300. The next factor was inadequate fire exits. Full occupancy of the entire complex was estimated to be roughly 2,750, which under Kentucky law would require 27.5 exits. The club only had 16.5 exits. Many of them were not clearly marked or easily reached. Some exits could only be reached by passing through 3 or more interior doors and corridors. Many victims perished in dead ends after becoming lost. Also, lack of firewalls played a part. This allowed the fire to spread and in addition allowed it to draw oxygen from other areas of the complex. Another factor was poor construction practices. The club had been built piecemeal, with inadequate roof support, no common ceiling, and high flammable components. Moreover, there was extreme safety code violations. There was no sprinkler system and no audible automatic fire alarm, and some doors were locked. Another debatable factor was poor oversight by regulatory authorities. Some say that the local volunteer fire department knew about the deficiencies but had not ordered them to be corrected. The official investigation into what caused the fire was inconclusive, but the factor most often cited is faulty aluminum wiring. A lack of sprinkler system added to the trouble, but the majority of the deaths were blamed on poorly marked exits and flammable carpeting and cushions that emitted toxic fumes when burned. On October 28, 2008, Kentucky Governor Steve Beshear appointed a panel to investigate the claims that arson may have been the cause of the fire. In March 2009, the panel, in recommending that the investigation not be reopened, characterized the new accusations as a very tiny shred of evidence of arson and a huge mountain of conjecture, unsupported speculation, and personal opinion. The fire at the Beverly Hills Supper Club was a night of horror and heroism, of unspeakable carnage and unshakable courage. Whether or not you witnessed the blaze, your life was affected by it. The revolution in class action litigation, the exposure of the dangers of certain kind of construction materials, and the revision of building and fire codes have reached every community in America. This is James Dagg. Thank you for listening.